picture this scenario for a second. You are like completely, utterly exhausted.
Oh, the classic travel fatigue.
Exactly. You've just endured this grueling 10-hour international flight. And of course, you were stuck in a middle seat, right?
That's always the middle seat.
Right near the back of the plane. You're wedged between a guy who kept falling asleep heavily onto your shoulder.
Oh, the worst.
And someone who evidently decided that, pungent tuna salad was the absolute perfect in-flight snack.
A deeply universal travel nightmare. We have literally all been in that exact middle seat.
Right. So the cabin air is terribly dry. Your knees are aching from being pressed against the tray table for hours. And you are functioning on maybe 20 minutes of actual interrupted, terrible quality sleep.
If you can even call it sleep.
Yeah, exactly. But finally, you hear the landing gear touchdown. You grab your overly stuffed carry-on, you shuffle down that endlessly long, brightly lit airport corridor with the squeaky moving walkways, and you finally arrive at your destination.
The immigration hall.
Yes. You step into the immigration hall, you wait in this zigzagging line for 35 minutes, staring blankly at the scuff marks on your shoes. And then finally, you are called up to the glass booth. You hand over your passport.
And at this point, your brain is like already at the baggage carousel.
Oh, totally. You're thinking about the hotel bed, maybe grabbing a quick coffee, taking a shower. But right here, in this tiny fluorescent-lit square of space, is where your long-awaited trip can abruptly, catastrophically end.
Yeah, it is the ultimate bottleneck of global travel. I mean, most people treat that glass booth like a simple administrative toll booth, They think it's just a place to get a stamp and move on.
A formality.
Right, a formality. But in reality, you are stepping into a highly calibrated behavioral analysis checkpoint.
Which brings us to today's topic. Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're doing a deep dive specifically for you, the listener, into the hidden psychology of customs and border control. Our mission today is to unpack this invisible, high-stakes psychological game being played right across that counter.
It really is a game.
It is. Because here is a truly terrifying fact. One wrong word to an immigration officer, literally a single misplaced syllable, can get your passport stamped with a denial and have you escorted onto the very next flight back home.
Yeah, and the kicker, that can happen even if you are telling the absolute truth.
That is just wild to me.
It is, and that specific detail always catches honest travelers completely off guard.
Yeah.
We are raised with this fundamental belief that, the truth is an impenetrable shield.
Like, if I'm innocent, I have nothing to worry about.
Exactly. If you aren't doing anything malicious, if you aren't smuggling contraband or running from the law, you just assume the truth will keep you safe. But in this specific, highly regulated environment, a poorly articulated truth is functionally identical to a lie.
Wow.
Yeah. It triggers the exact same defensive mechanisms in the bureaucratic system.
So we are going to break down the psychological traps waiting at the border so you don't inadvertently self-sabotage your trip you've spent months planning and paying for.
Yeah.
And the first trap usually happens within seconds of handing over your passport.
Right away.
The officer looks up, makes eye contact, and asks us a question that sounds incredibly mundane. They say, "What is the purpose of your visit?"
And as a tired, socially conditioned human being, your immediate instinct is to treat this interaction like friendly small talk.
Like a chat with a barista.
Exactly. You might think they're just making polite conversation to pass the time while their really slow computer system loads your profile. But the reality of that interaction is vastly different. The words you choose in the subsequent 3 seconds will dictate the entire trajectory of the interview.
So vocabulary is everything here.
Everything.
The trap here hinges on a very simple distinction between two words most of us use completely interchangeably in our daily lives. Let's look at the word work versus the word vacation.
Yeah, this specific semantic difference is, hands down, the most common way honest people accidentally trigger a massive bureaucratic nightmare.
Just by mixing up those two words.
Yes. Because when an immigration officer asks for the purpose of your trip, they are not asking for a human narrative. They do not want a nuanced chronological summary of your life or your itinerary.
They don't care about your snorkeling plans.
Not at all. They are running a binary sorting algorithm in their head. The legal system they enforce relies on rigid, inflexible categories. And generally speaking, the two biggest categories are tourism and business or employment.
Okay, so on the surface, if I'm going to another country for 2 weeks to just sit on a beach and drink out of a coconut, that obviously falls under the vacation bucket.
Right.
But if I'm moving there to take a full-time job at a local engineering firm, that falls into the work bucket, It seems like a pretty straightforward line in the sand.
Well, it seems straightforward until you introduce the messy complexity of modern remote life.
Right. The laptop class.
Exactly. When you use the word work standing at an immigration booth, you are not just describing an action you might take, like, typing on a keyboard. You are invoking a very specific, highly regulated legal framework.
It's a legal term to them.
Yes. To the border officer, the word work is a massive alarm bell. It translates to a series of legal questions in their head. Is this person taking a job away from a local citizen? Are they being paid by a domestic company?
Are they dodging taxes?
Exactly. Are they going to be participating in the local tax system? Do they hold the sterilized, heavily vetted visa required to perform labor within our sovereign borders?
Okay, let me push back on this on behalf of the listener, because the modern reality of travel blurs that line constantly.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's say I am going to that beach resort for 2 weeks. But like practically everyone else on the planet these days, I cannot completely disconnect from my office.
Right.
I know for an absolute fact that I'm going to be sitting by the pool, logging onto the hotel Wi-Fi, and checking my emails for an hour every morning. I might even have to take a mandatory Zoom call with my boss.
A very common scenario.
Very common. So in that scenario, isn't it actually safer, legally speaking, to just be 100% transparent? Shouldn't I step up to the booth and say, well, officer, it's a mix of work and vacation?
No, absolutely not.
Really?
In fact, that is probably the most dangerous phrase you could utter.
But it's the truth.
I know. If you say a mix of work and vacation, you feel like you are acting as a conscientious, honest citizen. But the officer isn't listening for your ethical nuance. They are listening for trigger words.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The moment the syllable work leaves your lips, their internal sorting algorithm shifts you out of the safe, low-risk tourist bucket and drops you directly into the high-risk, unauthorized employment bucket.
Even if the actual work is literally just replying to a 3-line email from my manager back home while I'm wearing a swimsuit.
The officer doesn't know you're wearing a swimsuit in this hypothetical future, and they definitely don't know the contents of your emails. All they know is that you just explicitly confessed to intending to work without a work visa.
Oh, man. So what happens then?
Well, now the burden of proof shifts dramatically. The officer is legally obligated to investigate your claim. They have to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your personal definition of work doesn't violate their country's complex labor laws.
So you've basically just forced them to open an active investigation into you.
Exactly.
What does that investigation actually look like for the traveler? Because it sounds like a lot more than just answering a few follow-up questions at the glass booth.
Oh, it is. It means you are going to the secondary screening room.
The dreaded secondary screening.
Yes. You will be pulled out of the line, escorted to a stark waiting area, and you might just sit there for hours. And they have the authority to demand access to your electronic devices.
Wait, like my actual phone?
Your phone, your laptop. They can search everything. They'll read through your private Slack messages or even call your employer back home to verify your role.
That is terrifying.
And if they find anything remotely ambiguous during that invasive search, like maybe a client of your company is located in the country you were trying to visit, you could easily be deemed a flight risk or a shadow laborer. Suddenly your vacation is over, your visa is revoked, and you are waiting for a seat on the next plane out.
So the takeaway for the listener here is that trying to be highly detailed and completely transparent is actually a massive vulnerability in this specific environment.
Yeah, the psychology of human interaction under pressure is so fascinating here. When people feel intimidated by authority figures, their natural defense mechanism is to over-explain.
We babble.
We babble. We operate under the false assumption that providing a higher volume of detail somehow proves our innocence. But in a highly rigid bureaucratic system, more detail simply provides more surface area for a critical misunderstanding.
More places to trip up.
Exactly. The officer does not want your diary. They want to know which legal bucket you belong in. If your primary overarching purpose is leisure, the only word that should leave your mouth is vacation. You have to edit your personal truth down to the safest, most accurate foundational category.
Okay, so if our baseline is established and we know our exact vocabulary going in, how do we handle it when the officer starts digging deeper?
Right.
Let's assume you navigate that first hurdle. You successfully categorize yourself as a tourist. You keep it remarkably brief.
Right.
But the interview isn't over. The officer then shifts to questions about your travel history.
And this is where the dynamic of the conversation fundamentally mutates.
Yes. It stops being about gathering basic information, and it turns into a high-stakes psychological evaluation.
This is the transition from simple categorization to active behavioral analysis. The officer will often look down at their screen, type a few keys, look back up at you, and ask a question along the lines of, have you been to our country before? Or when was the last time you visited?
And there is a crucial secret about this moment. The officer already knows the answer to the question they are asking.
That is the crux of the entire interaction. It is a deliberate illusion of ignorance.
An illusion.
Yes. When they scan your biometric passport, your entire travel history with that nation populates instantly on their screen. They know exactly what year you were there last. They know how many days you stayed. They know if you have ever overstayed a visa by even 24 hours.
So they aren't actually asking you.
No, they are asking you a question to which they actively hold the verified, factual answer.
You know what that reminds me of? It's like a parent interrogating a toddler.
Okay.
The parent asks, "Did you eat the cookies?" while they're literally holding the empty wrapper and staring at the chocolate smeared all over the kid's face.
It is remarkably similar to that dynamic, but, with a severe high-stakes difference.
Right. The parent isn't going to deport you.
Exactly. The parent in your scenario wants the toddler to confess so they can use it as a teaching moment and eventually forgive them. The immigration officer is hoping you lie or stumble so they can definitively deny you entry.
Wow.
It's an integrity check with a zero-tolerance policy.
So if they aren't looking for the actual informational data because it's already glowing on the monitor in front of them, what is the mechanism of action here? What exactly is happening biologically and psychologically in that split-second interaction?
They are running an open book test on your cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Yeah. When someone asks you a direct question, your brain has to process the audio, understand the context, and generate a verbal response. If you are telling the simple truth, that neural process is incredibly efficient.
It's just a memory.
Right. You access a stored memory in your brain and you report it. It's fluid. It takes very little metabolic effort. But if you are lying or if you are actively trying to conceal a piece of information, your cognitive load spikes dramatically.
Wait, so they aren't listening to what I'm saying about my 2019 trip.
Mm-hmm.
They're watching how hard my brain is working to remember it.
That is the core of the strategy.
Yeah.
The neuroscience of deception is actually exhausting for the body. To tell a lie, your brain has to divert significant blood flow to the prefrontal cortex.
Because you're literally building a fictional world.
Exactly. You aren't just remembering, you are building a fictional narrative from scratch. You have to invent the lie, ensure the lie aligns with physical reality, remember the details of the lie so you don't contradict yourself 3 sentences later, and actively suppress the genuine truth.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. All of this is happening while you are simultaneously monitoring the officer's microexpressions to gauge if they are buying your story. It takes a massive amount of cognitive RAM, and human beings are biologically terrible at hiding that mental effort.
So the physiological systems start to glitch under the pressure.
Precisely. When your working memory is overloaded, you experience physical leakage.
Leakage.
Yeah, your automatic physical systems stutter. The officer is watching for those glitches. They might see micro-hesitations before you speak. They might notice a sudden drop in your blink rate as your brain focuses entirely on the lie.
Oh, wow, the blink rate.
Yeah. They might even notice your feet subtly shifting to point toward the exit door because your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, is screaming at you to escape the interrogation.
But hold on, let me bring this back to the reality the listeners experience. We established at the very beginning of this deep dive that international travel is inherently physically stressful.
Absolutely.
You're jet lagged, you're dehydrated from the cabin air, you haven't slept, you're worried about your checked bags getting lost, and you're trying to figure out how to buy a train ticket in a language you don't speak.
It's a nightmare.
Right. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast on a travel day, let alone what specific month I last visited a foreign country 5 years ago.
Fair point. So how on earth does an officer tell the difference between normal, messy, travel fatigue anxiety and I'm hiding a dark, secret deception stress?
That is the most crucial question of the entire process, and it really highlights where the skill of a highly trained border agent shines. The officers are intimately aware that everyone standing in that line is experiencing a baseline level of stress.
Okay.
They aren't looking for the mere presence of anxiety. They're looking for a baseline deviation.
Break down baseline deviation for us. How do they establish a baseline in a matter of seconds?
Think of it like a heart monitor being attached the moment you walk up. When you approach the glass booth, hand over your passport and mumble hello,
Yeah.
the officer is unconsciously calibrating to your normal state.
Just reading your vibe.
Yeah. They observe your standard level of travel fatigue. They see that your hands are a little shaky from the airport coffee or your eyes are red from the dry airplane air. They hear the natural pitch of your tired voice. That is your established baseline. Normal human anxiety. Sweaty palms, wanting to get out of there, maybe a little irritable. Standard behavior?
Yes. And once they establish that baseline, they deploy the open book test. They asked, when were you here last? What they are intensely focused on is how your physical behavior changes in response to that specific trigger question.
Ah, I see.
If your story about a past trip changes mid-sentence, if the pitch of your voice suddenly jumps an octave, if you freeze entirely, or if you suddenly start over-explaining your previous itinerary in agonizing detail, that is a measurable deviation from your baseline.
So a sudden spike.
That sudden spike in physical stress isn't caused by jet lag. It is caused by the heavy cognitive load of deception.
They are essentially using their own questions to calibrate the polygraph machine, which happens to be you.
Perfectly said.
And if you fail the calibration, the consequences are immediate.
And the beautiful efficiency of this tactic from the perspective of border security is that they already hold the answer key. If you confidently say, no, I've never been here before, and their screen clearly shows you were in the country for 3 months last year, the trap snaps shut instantly.
It doesn't matter why you lied.
It does not matter why. Maybe you were genuinely confused about the dates. Maybe you misunderstood the phrasing of the question. In the eyes of the system, intent is secondary. You have just empirically demonstrated that you are an unreliable source of information.
Once you establish yourself as an unreliable narrator, every single other thing you say becomes highly suspect.
Exactly. If you are willing to lie, or even just be highly inconsistent about something as simple as your past travel history, which is literally a verifiable matter of public record, then how can the officer trust you when you claim you aren't carrying agricultural contraband?
Or trust you when you say you have enough money in your bank account.
Right. How can they trust that you can support yourself without seeking illegal employment during your stay? The foundational trust is broken, and the investigation escalates immediately to secondary screening.
It's genuinely chilling when you lay out the mechanics of it. It highlights how radically asymmetrical the power dynamic is in that room. We walk up to that booth, conditioned to think it's a mutual exchange of pleasantries and information.
But it's not.
No, we think we are two humans having a simple conversation. But we are actually stepping into a ruthless, unforgiving behavioral matrix.
It doesn't grade on a curve, and it definitely doesn't offer the benefit of the doubt.
This requires a complete reframing of how the listener should behave at the border. If the ultimate goal is to get through smoothly and get to your hotel, the strategy isn't to be overly friendly, charming, or chatty.
Please don't be chatty.
The strategy is to minimize your psychological footprint.
Yes. You want to give the bureaucratic system exactly what it needs to process your entry, and absolutely nothing more. Answer the specific question asked, concisely and accurately. Do not offer unsolicited context.
Keep it binary.
If they ask a yes or no question, give a binary yes or no answer. You have to actively resist the very human urge to fill the awkward silence. Silence feels deeply uncomfortable to us, so we tend to ramble to make the tension go away.
Which is exactly what they want.
It is. To an interrogator, silence is a deliberate tool. They use it to make you nervous enough to start rambling, hoping you accidentally introduce a new, investigatable detail.
It's like writing computer code. Every extra word you give them is a new line of code where a bug or a misunderstanding can hide. If you keep the code to one single line, just the word vacation, there's nothing there to misinterpret.
That is an excellent framework for it. Limit the code, limit the bugs.
Let's synthesize this psychological journey for the listener, because understanding these mechanisms is just vital for anyone planning international travel. We've established that customs is an active, high-stakes psychological evaluation resting on 3 core pillars.
Right.
First, vocabulary, the purpose trap. The system runs on rigid algorithms. Knowing the vast legal difference between work and vacation is the shield that keeps you out of the interrogation room. Don't let your honest desire to explain checking your emails turn you into a suspected illegal laborer.
Edit for the overarching category, not for narrative nuance.
Second, the illusion of ignorance. When they ask about your past, they're running an open book test. They aren't trying to learn your history. They're checking your integrity against a screen that already holds the truth.
The answer key.
Exactly. And third, the cognitive load test. They're using those known questions to test your physical consistency. They're watching for that baseline deviation, that sudden spike in brain activity and physical leakage that signals you are managing a lie rather than effortlessly retrieving a memory.
Just a normal, tired traveler.
Right. These three elements are quite literally the only things keeping you from being put on the next flight home.
And when you finally understand the underlying mechanics of the game, it stops being a terrifying random hurdle. It becomes a highly predictable system that you can navigate with confidence.
Which is incredibly empowering for the traveler. But, doing this deep dive also leaves me with a thought that goes way beyond the airport terminal. Think about the core tactic we explored today. Someone in a position of authority asking you a direct question they already know the factual answer to, strictly to measure your physical reaction, your cognitive stress, and your consistency.
It is a devastatingly effective interrogation technique, and it isn't limited to border control.
If border agents use this psychological tactic so effectively to weed out deception, where else in your daily life is someone playing this exact same game with you?
Oh, that's a great point.
Think about your typical week. The next time a manager calls you into their office to ask about a missed deadline, or a partner asks you casually about a missing text message, or a salesperson asks you a simple question about your maximum budget, you might want to pause before you start generating a complex answer. You might want to look at them and ask yourself, do they already hold the answer key?
Realizing that you are taking an open book test changes how you answer the question entirely.
It absolutely does. Yeah. So, the next time you find yourself standing at that glass booth, exhausted under those buzzing fluorescent lights, handing over your passport, take a deep breath. Know your category. Keep your code brief. And remember, the psychological test has already begun.